Radio TV Phono Nut here, and today we feature another lower-end turntable that's almost approaching vintage status. And for some of our younger viewers, this might be considered a vintage turntable. What we have is an Optimus model LAB340, 2-speed, 33 and 45, automatic return turntable. This particular one is from 1993, but I think Radio Shack offered this model from about 1989 up until around 95 or so. The earlier ones were badged Realistic, and then the later ones were Optimus. There might have even been a later RCA branded one, I'm not sure. I don't remember when Radio Shack and RCA or Thompson or whatever were associated with each other, but there were some RCA branded Radio Shack products in the mid to late 90s. Now, the earlier versions of this turntable used a metal platter. Unfortunately, this is a plastic platter on this one. I don't guess it's a huge big deal, but if I ever find a junker like this that's got a metal platter, I would certainly swap it out. The tone arm is non-adjustable. It has a fixed, at first I thought this used a counterbalance spring, but I think this one actually has a counterweight back here, so that's even better. So all of that is fixed, there's no adjustments. What you see is what you get, and that was typically the case with these lower end turntables from the 80s, 90s, and into the 21st century. And when this turntable was made, vinyl was pretty much considered a dead format. And what turntables being made, especially the ones made for the big box stores, were pretty much made as, for lack of a better term, an afterthought for those who had vinyl that they didn't want to get rid of, or possibly records that were not available on CD, so people needed a way to play them. And this model also has a built-in preamp, so you can use it on equipment that does not have a magnetic phono input. In fact, I plugged this turntable into the line input of a Sony boombox that I have, and it sounds amazingly well for what it is, much better than your typical Crosley Cruiser. In fact, my investment in this turntable and the boombox together is about $35. And the quality is so far ahead of a much more expensive Crosley Cruiser that it's not even funny. Now, unlike the Iowa turntable that I recently obtained, this one has its platter mat and has a working stylus in it, so that's a plus. That's two things I won't have to obtain right now. Now, I checked the speed of this with my strobe disc, and it is a little bit off on both 33 and 45, so we'll have to adjust that, and I'm not really surprised by that because most of these cheaper turntables were not set exactly on speed. They were oftentimes set a little fast and sometimes a little slow. Measuring our tracking pressure, 3.5 grams, which is about where we want it to be, and that seems to be about the typical tracking pressure for these types of turntables with the fixed tone arm, for the exception of the P-mount turntables, and those usually track around 1.25 grams. Now, I posted about this turntable in one of the Facebook audio groups, and one of the audio snobs turned his nose up at it because it doesn't have an adjustable tone arm and because it tracks heavier than 2.5 grams. Well, I've got sense enough to know that this is a cheap turntable, and a decent turntable with an adjustable tone arm that you can track at 1.5 to 2 grams is obviously going to be better and easier on the records than this thing will. But even with that said, I don't think this is going to destroy records with normal use. Now, yeah, if I sat down and put an album on it and played it over and over and over and over again, then eventually it's probably going to receive some damage. But with normal use, I don't think this turntable is going to carve up your records. In fact, I've seen some record sleeves where they showed a recommended tracking force of 5 grams for stereo records and 10 grams for mono records. In fact, just to show you the proof, here's a boxed set from the Longines Symphonette Society, Memories of the Roaring Twenties, probably from the 1960s, I would say. Just about every senior citizen who was around back then had these records stuck in the record storage compartment of their Magnavox or Zenith or GE or whatever brand of console stereo they had, which was typically fitted with a VM or BSR record changer with a ceramic cartridge that tracked in the 5 to 10 gram range, and many of these records are still in good shape today. It's been my experience that what kills records the most is improper handling and playing them on ill-maintained equipment, as in equipment with bad needles or improperly adjusted tone arms, or cases where, say, the lubricant is dried up and the tone arm doesn't move as freely as it should, or maybe the rubber suspension in the cartridge has become hardened and won't let the needle flex as easily as it should. And here we go. High-fidelity monaural records should be played with an approximate or an appropriate stylus and lightweight cartridge. Up to 10 grams is ideal. Note, monaural recordings will reproduce superb sound quality on either monaural or stereophonic record players. Okay, Longines Symphonette Gold Medal stereo recordings. These stereo recordings should only be played on stereophonic equipment. A cartridge weighing approximately 5 grams is ideal. And then over here it says, with proper care, this Longines Symphonette recording will reward you with rich listening pleasure for years to come. We suggest a diamond stylus for finest reproduction and minimum record wear. For best results, please replace worn styli. Dust can damage these fine recordings. Use a record cleaning or anti-static cloth, blah, 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 blah. And looking at these records, they look to be in relatively good shape. Probably because whoever owned them took care of them, and if they were played on a ceramic cartridge that tracked heavy, I'm sure the records were played sparingly. They probably weren't played over and over again. And these little Audio-Technica cartridges, to be as cheap as they are, actually do pretty good. In fact, you're liable to find that same cartridge on a lot of more expensive turntables produced today. Now, since there is a 78 RPM stylus available for this cartridge, I want to convert this to 3-speed, just like we did with the Iowa, but since this turntable is in relatively good cosmetic shape, I want to try to put a little bit more thought into it to where it'll look nice. I suppose I could put the speed changeover switch right in here under the platter, but that would entail me lifting the mat and flipping the switch, which really wouldn't be a big deal. But then nobody would know the turntable had been modified. In other words, it would look just like it does right now. And of course this switch would be disconnected. And this is how you date Radio Shack stuff. 10A3. 10 is October and 3 is 1993. So this record player was made October 1993, and you pretty much have to figure out the decade on your own. Now, before we get on with the 78 RPM modification, I want to properly adjust the pitch for 33 and 45. And on this particular turntable, there are a couple of holes in the bottom of the turntable. Yeah, I know it's upside down, but speed adjustment. One for 33 on the left, and then 45 is on the right when you're looking at the turntable from the front. This uses that same type of typical 2-speed motor that have the trimmers inside the motor, just like the Iowa turntable had, and many others, including the Crosleys and Victrolas, and, well, pretty much all of them. The only difference, this one uses a Matsushita motor, which is a better quality motor than the Chinese. Now that we know where the speed adjust trimmers are, you need to find a couple of suitable objects of equal height so you can sit the turntable up on them so you can easily get under the bottom of the turntable with your screwdriver to adjust the pots. And for a screwdriver, I have a small flat blade screwdriver with some masking tape wrapped around it so we won't accidentally short the screwdriver to the case of the motor. That won't hurt anything, but it'll cause the motor to run wide open, which will make adjusting the speed very difficult. Then you need a stroboscope disc, and this is my poor old stroboscope disc that I printed out and attached to an old trashed record. I need to just get me a nicer one. Now, I've heard of people downloading an app on their telephone to check speed, and personally I don't have a phone that fancy, don't want a phone that fancy, but the way I see it, that phone may weigh so much that it might bog down the drive mechanism in your motor on your turntable. So I really think the best way to adjust the speed is with a strobe disc, and having this disc attached to an old record kind of helps, because with the record on the platter, that adds enough weight that what the platter would be seeing with a record playing. And then you need, I'm using a 120 volt neon lamp attached to an AC power cord, because this lamp will flicker at 60 cycles per second, which is what this strobe is calibrated for. And what we'll do, we'll place the strobe on the turntable, and then we'll need to raise the tone arm so the needle doesn't contact the platter, and move the tone arm over so the turntable starts. And then 33 is our outer ring here, and with holding the neon light up close to the dots, we'll adjust the 33 trimmer until the dots appear stationary. Then we'll set the turntable to 45, and then adjust our 45 RPM trimmer until those dots appear to be stationary. Alright, here we are propped up on some speakers, and 33, turn the light off here. 33 is running a bit blurry. Well, whatever, it's running a bit slow, so we're going to take our screwdriver and adjust it until those dots appear stationary. Alright, 33, that's pretty close. Well, I guess the camera's going to misbehave, but 45 is pretty close. Now keep in mind, those adjustments are very touchy. Only the slightest bit will usually get you where you need to be, so don't go hog wild with turning those trimmers. Just the slightest turn will usually do it. Okay, using the built-in preamp, we're connected to this mid-80s Sony boombox that has a line input jack, and we're using this adapter to allow the RCA cables to be plugged into a 1/8 inch stereo jack. And this sounds pretty good considering. Now your typical Crosley portable is in the $50 to $80 range, some of them higher than that. This investment here about $35 between the turntable and boombox. And even though it's not high-end by any sense of the word, we have something that's way better than a Crosley Cruiser, and in my opinion won't tear up your records. Let's see if our auto return works. Oh yes, like a dream. And here we are with an LP. Now that that's out of the way, we can do the 78 RPM modification. Now, the simplest way to get 78 RPM would be to simply turn the 45 RPM trimmer up for 78, but in doing so you would lose your 45 RPM. So in order to keep all three speeds, we'll need to add a switch a potentiometer, and some hookup wire to the existing circuit, and then we will have all 3 speeds available to us. Okay, we have a couple of schematics to look at. The first one is the original circuit, and if we can get the plane to fly over and get the wind to stop blowing, we'll get into this. Okay, we have our 120 volts AC coming in from the wall outlet into the primary of the power transformer, and then coming off of the secondary we have a much lower AC voltage. We'll say 9 volts just for the sake of argument, going into this bridge rectifier, which consists of 4 diodes, and then coming out of the bridge rectifier, plus and minus, we have our DC voltage being filtered by this 1000 microfarad 16 volt. I certainly hope it's not a 1000 volt capacitor. I see my helper, he's found him a stick to chew on. But yeah, 1000 microfarad 16 volt. And then coming off of that, we have our DC voltage going into our preamp board, which is active as long as the turntable is plugged in. And then coming off of that, we go into this auto stop switch, that when the tone arm is on the rest, it opens this switch, which kills the DC voltage going to the motor here. So you can see on the motor we have 4 terminals, minus, plus, that's where our 12 volts, or roughly 12 volts DC goes into the motor. And then these bottom 2 terminals here connect to our speed control switch. When the switch is open, the turntable revolves at 33 1/3 revolutions per minute. When the switch is closed, then the turntable will revolve at 45 revolutions per minute. Now, you're probably wondering why there's no kind of voltage regulated power supply here. Well, that's because they really don't need one. All that is done inside the motor. If you look on the motor, there's a 4-pin integrated circuit soldered to the little terminal board on the motor here. And I believe there's some stuff inside the motor too. Well, at least the speed adjustment pots are inside the motor. And like I showed earlier, there are 2 pots inside the motor, one marked high for 45 and one marked low for 33. Now let's look and see what we need to do if we want to add 78 RPM speed in addition to 33 and 45. So we have our 12 volts roughly going into the motor. That part is not changed. And then the 3rd pin here on the motor connects to the center pin of a single pole double throw center off switch. Now this can be a toggle switch, slide switch, rocker switch, whatever. And then the 4th pin, the bottom pin, comes down to one end of this single pole double throw switch. That's your 45 RPM position. So when we throw the switch to 45, it shorts these 2 terminals out on the motor, just like before up here. On the other side of the switch, which will be our 78 position, we have one end of a 500 ohm potentiometer, which I've seen anywhere from 300 ohm to 500 ohm used in this position. It's really not critical. When it's properly set to 78 RPM, you read about 165 ohms across it. So getting back to what I was saying, one end of the pot connects to the 78 RPM position of the switch, and then the center wiper of the pot comes around here and connects to pin 4 of this IC here. Now, on record players that are manufactured to play 3 speeds, and on replacement motors that you can often find on the internet, eBay especially, that are designed for 3-speed record players, there's a 5th pin on this edge connector here, and that 5th pin simply connects to this pin here on the IC, so you can use one of those motors to replace one of these older motors that have 4 pins on the connector here. Okay, looking at the motor, we have our DC input on these 2 pins, negative, positive, and then these 2 pins here are our speed control switch. When the switch is pushed in to 45, that closes the switch and shorts these 2 terminals out to give us 45 RPM. And once you add the new switch and the potentiometer, the center of the potentiometer will solder to that point right there, that pin right there on the control IC. Now you want to be real careful doing that because you don't want to create a solder bridge, and you probably want to use fairly small hookup wire like this here. And I will show this again once everything is mounted and in place. Now as far as the switch, if I can remove this original switch and neatly file out this hole to install my rocker switch here, then I'll go ahead and put a switch on the front. But if I can't do that without it looking tacky, then we'll have to do something else. Yes, we can mount our new switch where the old switch was and it not look too tacky, but we're going to have to go get our file and enlarge this hole a little bit. Okay, there's our switch. 0 will be 33, position 1 will be 45, and position 2 will be 78. That don't look too bad. Alright, here we are in place, our switch mounted, and our little board that I salvaged off of a junk record player with a pod on it. I was going to use a terminal strip, but I remembered I had that old little board off of a junk record player, and then the wiper of our pot connects right there. That's good. Get even blurrier than you were. Right there. That pin right there on the control IC. Okay, there we go. Since we're using the internal preamp, we have RIA equalization, but you know, you can switch the preamp out and plug it into your own preamp and have the correct EQ curve, but at least this way you can still listen to your records.
You've gone away and left me, and all I see is a lonely moon. If holding hands on the menu, well that wouldn't hurt. And don't forget those kisses when you serve the dessert. What's cooking, cookie? Let's have a lookie. The fighting was over for me evermore. For I don't hurt anymore. All my teardrops are dried. No more walking the floor. On the battlefield, we must never have weapons down. We don't have.
Okay, that ought to about do it. Yeah, I was looking on the internet and I found a guy who modifies these turntables and sells them, and I think just to what he claims to convert one from 33 and 45 to 33 and 78, which is nothing more than turning the 45 speed pot up. I think he gets like $125 for that. And then to do what I just did, something like $225. Now, before I paid somebody that kind of money to modify a cheap turntable like this, for that I would just go put the extra what, $50 or $75 with it and go buy a new Audio-Technica direct drive turntable. I mean, I don't begrudge the guy. If he can get that kind of money and people are willing to pay it, then more power to him, but that's just a case of anybody who does pay that is just not very well informed, and you know, for something that, $5 worth of parts and not very long, less than an hour labor, then that's a pretty good little price there. Okay, I noticed this needle is bottoming out, so it's 3.5 grams, a little bit heavy for this particular needle. Do I need to stick a wheel weight on the back of the tone arm to maybe get the pressure down a little bit? Or maybe I just need to take that cartridge off and put a Stanton 500 on there, since it's a standard half-inch mount. Alright, adding a wheel weight to the back of the tone arm, I got the pressure down to about 1.8 grams, and the needle for this cartridge tracks in the 1.5 to 3.5 range. So I guess the 3.5 was kind of pushing it, and that's the reason it was bottoming out on a 78. So what I may try to do is substitute this cartridge for a Stanton 500 cartridge that's designed to track a little heavier. It tracks at 3 to 7 grams, and that might be more suitable for 78. And here's our Stanton cartridge installed, tracking at 3 grams, and 3 to 7 is the recommended range for that cartridge, and I know these will track okay at 3 grams, so we ought to be in good shape now. Alright, there we go, and I think that cartridge sounds better for 78s anyway. And as you can see, we're not bottoming out, so that's what we want to happen. I really want to find a metal platter for this, because that plastic one bouncing up and down just really drives me nuts. Alright, here we are with an LP, or should I say a 45. And that stylus is also behaving correctly, so I think this one's good to go. Okay, this motor was a little noisy, so I snuck a couple of drops of oil on the top bearing there. And I'm going to clean this old grease off of the center spindle bearing, bushing, whatever, and re-grease it, and then put it back together, and this thing ought to be ready to roll. Alright, we're back together. It's running much quieter now. It doesn't sound like a pulpwood truck. I'd like to oil the bottom bushing on the motor as well, but I don't really know how to do that without taking it apart. And I don't want to try to take that little DC motor apart, because it may never go back together again. But we got the top bushing oiled and re-greased the flatter spindle bushing, and it sounds 1,000 times better now. So if you have one of the newer turntables with the fixed mount Audio-Technica cartridge, and if your 78 RPM needle bottoms out, then in that particular situation the only option you'll have is to either attach a counterweight to the rear of the tone arm, or if it's one of the tone arms or the counterbalance spring, you'll need to pull some links off the spring to try to lighten it up, which can be a real pain in the butt in these kind of turntables. So you might still be better off just putting a counterbalance weight on the rear of the tone arm and being done with it. Okay, after everything was lubricated, it ran a bit fast, as you might expect, so I had to go back in and readjust the pitch adjustment trimmers. And now I think it's ready to roll. Okay, now I think what we'll do is add a variable pitch control on here that will allow the user to obviously adjust the pitch up and down. And on that note, you may have recently saw an Audio-Technica turntable video that I did. I left it up very briefly, but after watching it, I didn't really like it, so I took it down, and I'm going to change some things about it. Now, as far as the needle, the Audio-Technica needle bottoming out, I ran into the same thing on the Audio-Technica turntable. So what I have done, and I hope I just didn't waste $30-something, is I ordered a 78 needle Audio-Technica needle from LP Gear. From what I'm told, their needles are decent. They're not fan steel generics. So I'm going to order I've already ordered an Audio-Technica 78 needle from LP Gear, and we'll put that on the Audio-Technica AT-LP60X turntable. And if that needle does not bottom out, then I might put the original Audio-Technica cartridge back on this turntable so we can keep it with the cartridge that it came with. And then I'll put another LP Gear 78 stylus on this turntable. But for right now, let's open it back up and add the pitch control. Okay, a few things I like about this turntable over the Audio-Technica is this one has a real counterweight instead of a spring, even though you can adjust this. And this one has a tone arm lock to lock the tone arm during transit. The Audio-Technica doesn't have that. And this one has standard 1/2-inch cartridge mounting, which the Audio-Technica does not have. Even though you can't change the position of the cartridge here, you can at least mount another cartridge on this tone arm. And since that 78 RPM Audio-Technica fan steel needle was bottoming out, I installed a Stanton 500 cartridge on this arm. And if the LP Gear needle proves to be okay, then I may put the Audio-Technica cartridge back on here. One thing I don't like about this particular turntable is the plastic platter, which the Audio-Technica uses a metal platter, and some versions of this turntable used a metal platter. I did check to see if the Audio-Technica metal platter would fit on this turntable, and it will not. So my only hope to get a metal platter on this one is to find one of these that's junk that has the metal platter on it, but this plastic platter, it just riding up and down, it just drives me up the wall. I don't really like that. Alright, 45. And as you can tell, the pitch control is working just as it should. Alright, 33 1/3. And lastly, a 78.
That's how I measure my treasure of schemes. I'm never poor if I...
Okay, when I get the 78 stylus for the Audio-Technica from LP Gear, I will incorporate that into the Audio-Technica video and re-release that. But for now, just some closing thoughts on these types of turntables, and I'll address one comment that was made on the Audio-Technica video before I deleted it. Someone said that given the nature of Audio-Technica's products and their quality, they were surprised that they would stoop so low as to produce a turntable to this caliber. Well, yeah, those turntables are fairly low end, but I've seen a lot worse, as in these little plastic plattered turntables that have the red-tipped, red-bodied ceramic cartridge in them from such fine companies as Ion, Crosley, Pyle, etc., Victrola. And beginning in the early 1990s, when vinyl was pretty much considered a dead format, pretty much every turntable carried at your big box store was something along these lines here. By that point, turntables that most stores were carrying were not geared to audiophiles. They were geared to people who just wanted something to play their records on, that they didn't have to waste time setting up and all that. They could just bring it home and plug it into their equipment and play their records. You know, such people as Grandma with her 10 box sets of Reader's Digest and Longines Symphonette records that she hasn't heard in 10 years because her record changer and her console stereo tore up. So, you know, the kids just buy her one of these cheap turntables to plug into it, and she's happy that she can hear her albums again. But even though the entry-level Audio-Technica turntables are a bit on the cheap side, one could certainly do a whole lot worse, as in go buy a Crosley Cruiser or something like that. But Audio-Technica is just trying to do what most other companies do. They're trying to reach the entire spectrum of customers, everyone from the low-budget college kid who doesn't have a fortune to spend on a turntable but wants something that sounds remotely decent, all the way up to the professional audio market and audiophile market. They offer something for everybody. In fact, I was looking on some website last night, and apparently Audio-Technica still makes a phono cartridge that cost about $1,000. Yeah, they are definitely very much so still in the high-end audio business. Alright, I found me a knob. It looks a lot better. Now, another thing to consider, would it be worth buying these turntables to convert to 3-speed plus add a pitch control and turn around and make a profit off of them? No, I really don't think it would. When you consider buying new turntables, the Audio-Technicas are between $100 and $125 a piece, and that stylus I ordered from LP Gear with shipping was about $38. So you got to factor that in, and unless you have a well-stocked junk box or a local parts house where you can buy the parts you need without having to pay shipping, you're going to spend probably $20 or $25 in parts with shipping. So by the time you add everything together and mark it up enough to where you can make something off of it to make it worth your while, you're getting pretty close to what an Audio-Technica, what is it, the AT-LP120, the 3-speed quartz lock DJ turntable cost, and nobody's going to pay you $250 for a modified entry-level Audio-Technica turntable when they can put just a little more with that and go buy a better brand new Audio-Technica turntable that's quartz locked and heavier duty and manufactured to play 3 speeds. Now, the main purpose of this video is just to show those who may have existing turntables and who are electronically inclined a way to obtain 3 speeds out of what they already have if they're on a budget, and say the $300 or $350, $400, or however much it costs. 3-speed Audio-Technica turntable is not in the budget, and I certainly understand that. I wouldn't mind having one of those turntables either, but there just always seems to be a better place to put $300+ than in another turntable. So, in situations like that, it's handy to know how to modify a cheaper turntable that you might already have on hand to accomplish the same task. Okay, this schematic is based on a Pioneer PL990 turntable, which is very similar to the Audio-Technica and the Sonys and the various other brands that have similar circuitry and a similar mechanism, except the Pioneer has variable pitch. Now, before we look at the schematic, we need to look at the bottom of the motor, and if your motor uses the typical 4-connection motor, it'll be pin 1 will be minus, pin 2 will be your plus for your 12 volts or 9 volts or whatever your motor operates off of, and then you'll have pins 3 and 4. Now normally when pins 3 and 4 are open circuited, you're at 33. When you short pins 3 and 4, you get 45. This motor has speed regulation circuitry built in it and 2 trim pots inside the motor. The one marked L is for 33. You should adjust that one to get 33 right, and then once that's right, you flip it to 45 and adjust the pot marked H to get 45, and do so with an insulated screwdriver, even if you have to wrap masking tape around it. Okay, so our 12 volts comes into our motor on pins 1 and 2, 1 being negative, 2 being positive. Also coming off of pin 2, we connect to the wiper of our 10K external pitch adjustment pot. And then at the other end of that pot, we have a 2.2 K ohm resistor. And then coming down from the other end of that 2.2 K ohm resistor, we connect to pin 3 of the motor. And then also connected to pin 3 of the motor, we'll connect to our center terminal of our single pole double throw center off switch. That's for 33. When the switch is in the center, that's the center off position and no connection is made to any other part of the circuit. Okay, on the switch terminal that you choose for 45, that comes back around here and connects to pin 4 on the motor. Now for 78, which will be the other outer terminal of the switch, that goes over and connects to one end of a 300 ohm trim pot, which will be set to approximately 160 ohms for 78 RPM. And then the center wiper of that pot connects to pin 4 of the motor control IC that's mounted on the motor itself. Now, as far as this external pitch adjust pot, when you turn it to the right, that should speed the motor up. If you turn it to the right and it slows the motor down, it's no big deal. Just unsolder one of the lead from one of the outer terminals of the pot and move it over to the other outer terminal of the pot, and the motor will speed up when the pot is turned to the right. Here's the bad motor out of that Audio-Technica turntable that we're going to redo. It's got a bent shaft on it, and I show it to you to bring up the orientation of the speed control regulator IC. On the older turntables, it's oriented so pin 1 is here and pin 4 is down here, and pin 4 is what you want to tack your 78 RPM pot to, the wiper from that pot to pin 4. But on this Audio-Technica motor, the IC is oriented so pin 1 is here and pin 4 is up here, so you want to pay close attention to that. And the easiest way to do that is pay attention to where the number is. If the number is visible from this direction, then pin 1 will be right here. If the number can only be seen from this direction back here, then pin 1 will be right there. And I will now paste a copy of this schematic at the end of the video so you can pause it if you want to study it and draw it out if you need to. Now the little Crosley portable record players that have a pitch control, they use a 500 ohm pot and a 680 ohm resistor in series with the pot, and it's wired differently from this. And the reason being, the little Crosley portables have a smaller diameter motor pulley and a smaller diameter platter, which means the speed of the motor is different. It's the same basic motor, it's just they're running it at a different speed. And if you wire one of these bigger turntables up like the Crosley is wired up with the 500 ohm pot, then you're not going to obtain the right platter rotational speed. So for these larger turntables with a 12-inch platter, this is the way you need to do it right here.